方丈，好年轻哦。
Yongxin, the abbot of the Shaolin Temple, a deputy to the National People's Congress, and vice president of the Buddhist Association of China, he's in trouble. On July 25th, rumors were flying online that he had been taken away by authorities for investigation. The stories were super detailed, like people really knew what happened. Some people called the Shaolin Temple to ask, hey, is this true?
网上一直都在传圣永信方丈被警方带走，在24号下午，不知道这个是不是真的？
官方的信息。
官方的信息是咱们自己会发布吗？
官方信息。
那您这2天在寺院里边有看到圣永信方丈吗？
我没常去找他，我来这边学习了。
您现在没在寺院里是吧？
对，我刚到这边学习。
那就是网上说的这个事儿是不是真的？
我不知道，我现在来这边学习了，知道吧？
这2天网上有传圣永信方丈。
The Shaolin Temple responded by saying, "We don't know anything about it. You'll have to ask the authorities." Then some sharp-eyed folks noticed that Yongxin had a Weibo account with over 800,000 followers, and he used to post every day. But after 6 a.m. on July 24th, nothing. No more updates. His last post? It was about how Buddhism guides people to the Pure Land. A little odd, honestly. I mean, as a monk, he meditates and practices every day, rain or shine. Posting online was like part of his daily routine. So for him to suddenly go quiet for 48 hours, it raised eyebrows. People started to wonder if something had really happened. By July 26th, the rumors got even more detailed. There was even a so-called police bulletin floating around online, and it was wild. It claimed that Yongxin had been involved in commercializing the Shaolin Temple for years and supposedly transferred $41.3 billion worth of assets to his own name. The report also accused him of having 51 mistresses and over 100 illegitimate children, many of whom were allegedly born through surrogates. It said that just days ago, he tried to leave the country through Pudong Airport with 34 people, but was stopped by the authorities. Then someone posted that bulletin and tagged the official Kaifeng police account, asking, "Is this true?" The response was short. "It's a rumor. Don't believe it. The relevant work is in progress." Now that reply was telling. They denied the bit about him trying to flee and getting stopped, but that vague line, "relevant work is in progress," sounded like an indirect confirmation that Yongxin was indeed under investigation. On the afternoon of July 27th, the Shaolin Temple's own website posted an announcement. It said that Yongxin had long been seizing personal property and project funds, had inappropriate relationships with multiple women, and even fathered illegitimate children. A joint task force was now investigating him for suspected criminal activity. Just like that, they completely distanced themselves from him, and it pretty much confirmed that Yongxin was, in fact, under official investigation. Then, on July 28th, the Buddhist Association of China also made a statement. They said they received a report from the Henan Buddhist Association requesting that his Ji Dai, basically a monk's certificate, like a Buddhist ID, be revoked. They firmly agreed to cancel it. At that point, it was clear. Yongxin had been taken in by authorities, and it was now a confirmed criminal investigation. But looking back, there are definitely some odd things about this whole situation. Something doesn't add up. Let's start with the timeline. Yongxin was reportedly taken away on July 25th, and it was already being reported by the media. But here's the thing. According to how investigations usually work in China, if someone's under disciplinary review by the CCDI, their organization doesn't cut ties with them until there's a formal conclusion. Only after the Joint Task Force finishes their investigation and decides to hand the case over for prosecution does the organization take public action. Now think about this. Yongxin isn't just anyone. He's the abbot of the Shaolin Temple, vice president of the Buddhist Association of China. He holds official, organized positions. Even though Yongxin is a monk, he's still part of the system. He's a party man. Under normal circumstances, if someone like him gets taken away, but there's no official conclusion yet, his organization wouldn't immediately cut ties. That's just not how it's supposed to work. Even if it was the police who detained him, there's still a 48-hour window for questioning. And even if they decide to hold him longer, there's still a time limit before they must formally charge him. But here, the police hadn't released any official statement yet, and already the Shaolin Temple cut him off. Then the Buddhist Association of China followed suit. That's odd, isn't it? If you look back at how China has handled corrupt officials in the past, those official decisions, like distancing or removal, only come after the joint investigation team and law enforcement wrap things up and reach a formal conclusion. So this whole situation doesn't follow the usual playbook. Then look at what the Shaolin Temple actually said in its statement, that he seized private property, took funds from projects, had inappropriate relationships with multiple women, and even had illegitimate children. That led to all the Playboy monk talk online. But here's the thing, this isn't new. Back in 2015, about 10 years ago, one of Shi Yongxin's disciples named Shi Yanlu, who used the alias Shi Zhengyia, publicly accused him online. He wrote articles exposing this exact same stuff, saying Shi Yongxin misused temple property, had improper relationships, and fathered kids out of wedlock. Shi Yanlu even took physical evidence all the way to Beijing, straight to the Supreme People's Procuratorate. After 2 years of investigation, the Joint Task Force at the time said there was nothing wrong with Shi Yongxin. No illegitimate children, no project fund misappropriation, case closed. Now fast forward 10 years, and suddenly the Shaolin Temple is confirming those same accusations, before any current investigation has even concluded. So now people online are saying, 10 years ago, if you said he had illegitimate kids, that was a false accusation. 10 years later, when the temple says the same thing, now it's called evidence? Basically, if they want to take someone down, everything becomes a problem. If they don't want to take them down, then nothing's a problem. People are asking, what kind of investigation team was that back then? How did they come up with that conclusion? And why does the Shaolin Temple suddenly know today that he has illegitimate kids, even before the current authorities say anything? So some folks are now asking, if that's the case, shouldn't the team that investigated him 10 years ago be held accountable? That's why today, I think it's worth digging into this. Why exactly did Shi Yongxin fall this time? What really brought him down? It's a question that deserves a closer look. But before we get into the analysis, let me tell you about a time I actually crossed paths with Shi Yongxin. It was around 2005. I was a reporter for CCTV, working on the Focus Report segment in the Oriental Horizon program. Back then, we used to get tips and inside info from people all the time. One day, someone reached out and told me that a captain from the Zhengzhou Criminal Police had a suitcase full of documents and wanted to talk. I thought, okay, sounds interesting. So we met in someone's apartment in a neighborhood in the southern part of Beijing. This police captain from Zhengzhou showed up rolling a suitcase. He opened it up, and it was packed with case files and transcripts. Turns out, this guy had been handling a major case back in Zhengzhou, the Song Liugan gang case. You can look it up. Back in 2003 to 2004, this was a well-known organized crime case in Zhengzhou. This gang took over cargo train cars, ran all kinds of illegal stuff, abused their power, harassed women, the whole 9 yards. After Song Liugan and his gang were arrested, the authorities labeled them a criminal underworld group. But honestly, in my view, they were a pretty low-level outfit, more like small-time gangsters. Once they were in custody, they started talking. Like, really talking. What did they confess? All sorts of details about their ties with officials in the Zhengzhou Public Security Bureau, how they paid them off, how those officials acted as their protection. The case files were full of this stuff. That criminal police captain I met told me, after these guys confessed all that, when the prosecutors came to collect the case files for trial, they cherry-picked. What did they take? Only the parts where the gang confessed their own crimes. All the stuff about bribing officials and being shielded by the police, left out, completely ignored. You see, these gangsters thought they could get leniency for giving up their backers. You know that old saying in China, confess and you'll get lighter punishment. Resist and you'll rot in jail. They assumed that by revealing dirt on the Zhengzhou Public Security Bureau, especially the higher-ups, they'd be seen as cooperating, maybe even be seen as making a contribution. But they were naive. The prosecutors made sure none of the testimony that mentioned public security officials ever made it into the court files. All they kept were the gang's confessions of their own crimes. That police captain, I'm not sure what kind of relationship he had with the prosecutors or his superiors, but he felt something wasn't right. After all, he was the one who personally interrogated those suspects. The transcripts were all in his hands. So what did he do? He fled Zhengzhou with the files and came to Beijing. That's when he found me. I was still a reporter at CCV at the time. He wanted us to expose it on our program. He told me, look at this. During the investigation of the Song Liugan gang, we clearly found that the Zhengzhou Public Security Bureau was shielding them. But during the legal process, all of that was wiped away. That's why those corrupt police leaders never got punished, even though they clearly protected this gang. Meanwhile, Song Liugan and his crew were sentenced and eventually executed. The whole case was declared closed. Then the captain told me a story. He said during the investigation, they also seized a videotape. The person in the video? Shu Yongxin. In the footage, Shi Yongxin was seen engaging in sexual activity with two women. Whether it was one after the other, or at the same time, wasn't entirely clear. But either way, it was compromising. So how did this tape even exist? Apparently, Song Liugan's gang had deliberately recorded it. They had set up the whole thing with the intent to blackmail Shi Yongxin. But before they could actually follow through with the blackmail, they got busted. The tape was confiscated by the police. And guess what? When prosecutors came to collect the case files, they didn't take the tape. So the footage showing Shi Yongxin with two prostitutes was never officially dealt with. It just disappeared into the system. Later on, as many people now know, a police transcript from 2004 started circulating online again. It involved Shi Yongxin going to the local police to report a woman named Liu, who, according to him, tried to blackmail him for several million yuan. This Miss Liu was a businesswoman from Shenzhen. Once Shi Yongxin reported her, the Zhengzhou police immediately sent people to Shenzhen, brought her back to Zhengzhou, and took a formal statement from her. That transcript eventually leaked online and has resurfaced in the past few days. If you read it, it's very detailed. The woman said her sexual relationship with Shi Yongxin began around the year 2000, when she was still married. She claimed they had sex about a dozen or maybe 20 times in total. At one point, she even got pregnant and had an abortion after 2 months. She also mentioned she had evidence of their relationship. Two main pieces. One was a pair of underwear that allegedly had Shi Yongxin's semen on it. The second was actual semen she claimed to have preserved, which she said was stored by a friend of hers who worked as a doctor. She said Shi Yongxin once promised to pay her several million yuan, but then went back on his word. That's when the relationship turned hostile. She also said Shi Yongxin had a disciple named Shi Yanbao, who allegedly called and threatened to kill her multiple times. The police documented all of this in the transcript. So how did the case end? The official investigators later concluded that this wasn't a case of blackmail. It was just a financial dispute, and she was released. Rumor has it, Shi Yongxin paid her 2 to 3 million yuan to settle it privately. This case showed just how much influence Shi Yongxin had locally. Despite the woman providing what she claimed was solid evidence, underwear, semen, witness accounts, and clear descriptions of their relationship, the case was buried. Then, in 2015, Shi Yongxin's disciple, Shi Yanlu, went to Beijing to report him. One of the key pieces of evidence he used was this very police transcript. Now, whether that transcript came from the police captain who gave me information back in the day, I can't say. I also don't know what happened to that captain later on. But according to some reports, whoever leaked the transcript ended up getting punished, possibly even suspended from their job. Still, this transcript was the foundation of Shi Yanlu's 2015 accusations. And it wasn't just about the affair. He also alleged that Shi Yongxin had been embezzling temple property. Specifically, Shi Yongxin had set up a company called the Shaolin Intangible Assets Management Company, where he held an 80% ownership stake. He was also tied to another company called Huanxidi. That company was originally under the name of his younger brother Liu Yingbiao, who held 35% of the shares. Later, Liu transferred his shares to a woman surnamed Han, who was supposedly a Buddhist nun. This nun eventually had a child, and people began to speculate that the child was actually Shi Yongxin's. After nearly 2 years of investigation, the authorities officially concluded that Shi Yongxin had no illegitimate children. One of the women, alleged to be the mother of his daughter, Ms. Han, was reportedly just someone Shi Yongxin had adopted the child from. The officials said he had already lost the ability to have children. Another girl suspected to be his daughter, surnamed Liu, was proven via DNA test to be the daughter of Shi Yongxin's fourth younger brother. Of course, they never made that DNA test public. As for the companies and property, the investigators said Shi Yongxin was just holding shares on behalf of others, and that the assets, including the cars, were all registered under the Shaolin Temple, not under his personal name. And just like that, they cleared Shi Yongxin of everything. Clean slate. You could say that 2015 was the biggest crisis Shi Yongxin had ever faced since becoming the abbot of the Shaolin Temple. And the fact that he managed to survive it, it wasn't easy. That alone shows just how powerful and well-connected he really was. Shi Yongxin's life, honestly, is kind of legendary. Back in 1981, at just 16 years old, he joined the Shaolin Temple as a monk. At that time, the temple was in total ruins. According to what people said, there were barely more than a dozen people living there, with only about 28 mu, a few acres, of barren land. Lunch was just corn porridge, and not even enough of it to go around. But in 1982, something huge happened. That year, the movie Shaolin Temple was released. I still remember it from when I was a kid. It was a national phenomenon. People lined up in the streets to see it. Jet Li starred in it, and movie tickets back then were only 5 or 10 cents. Yet it made over 100 million yuan at the box office. For that time, that was insane. All of a sudden, the entire country was obsessed with Shaolin culture. People flocked to visit the temple. But the truth was, the real Shaolin Temple was falling apart. It had been badly burned down in 1928 during the chaos of the warlord era. A guy named Shi Yusan had set it on fire, and major halls like the Grand Hall and the Library of Scriptures were destroyed. The place was in shambles. Thanks to the movie, though, Shaolin Temple was suddenly seen as China's #1 ancient temple. Shi Yongxin's master passed away early, so he ended up managing the temple at a very young age. At one point, he visited a temple called the Damo Institute in Japan. While there, he happened to come across a set of old photographs taken of Shaolin Temple from the 1920s. He took copies of those photos back to China and used them as reference to start rebuilding the temple, aiming to restore it to its original design from before the fire. That move alone shows how smart and calculating he was. High EQ, high IQ. I remember reading a detail in a news report that really stood out. When he was organizing the grand 1500th anniversary celebration of the temple, he wanted to report it to the provincial party secretary. But he knew it was nearly impossible to get a formal meeting. So what did he do? He found out what day the secretary was taking a train to Beijing and bought a ticket for the same train. Once on board, he seized the chance, sat with the secretary, and briefed him for hours during the ride. When they arrived in Beijing the next day, Shi Yongxin quietly bought another ticket and headed straight back to Zhengzhou. That tells you everything you need to know about his instincts and political savvy. Under his leadership, the Shaolin Temple saw both political and commercial success. Economically, tourism exploded. The temple started selling entrance tickets, opened a martial arts school nearby, and turned Shaolin into a full-blown brand. They franchised the Shaolin name to manage other temples across China, and even opened branches in the US, Australia, Germany, you name it. There are Shaolin temples all over the world now, and politically he climbed the ladder fast. First, he became abbot of Shaolin. Then he joined the Henan Province Buddhist Association as a board member. Eventually, he made it all the way to vice president of the National Buddhist Association of China. He enjoyed official ranking equivalent to a deputy minister. On top of that, he was also a delegate to the National People's Congress and a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. So you could say Shi Yongxin wasn't just a monk. He was both an official and a businessman, a monk who played both sides well. See, the Shaolin Temple holds a very special place in the hearts of Chinese people. It's not just a religious site, it's a symbol. Over the years, it's constantly received visits from high-level political leaders. Even top officials like Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and Jia Qinglin, all members of the Politburo Standing Committee, have been there. And ministers? Too many to count. Whenever these VIPs visited Shaolin, it was always Shi Yongxin who hosted them personally. That tells you just how deep his political connections ran. So the fact that he was able to survive that major crisis in 2015? Honestly, not surprising. Don't let the monk's robe fool you. Shi Yongxin wasn't just any monk. He was a monk with serious influence and serious backing. Now, the question is, why did he fall this time? Why is he in trouble now? It definitely wasn't because of the illegitimate children rumors. And it wasn't about embezzlement either. Why? Because if those things were really going to bring him down, they would have done it 10 years ago. Back then, a full investigation concluded he was clean. Case closed. That alone shows he already handled the situation at the time. So what changed now, a full decade later? A report from Keishin offered a key clue. Apparently, back in early February this year, Shi Yongxin traveled abroad. When he returned to China, he was immediately placed on a travel watch list, border control. By May, Shaolin Temple's internal management committee had already been taken over by a special task group. They began both administrative control and an internal investigation. Though Shi Yongxin was technically free to move around domestically, his overseas trips were cancelled. He was under unofficial restrictions. Then, on July 25th, things escalated. He was officially taken in by authorities. Reports say it was the police from Xinjiang City who picked him up. But if you rewind the timeline and look at where he went in February, there were already warning signs. On February 1st, Shi Yongxin led a small group of disciples to the Vatican. Yes, that Vatican, to meet with the Pope. They had a warm meeting in the Pope's office. They even met with the Vatican's Secretary of State for a friendly exchange. That move? That was a major red line. Why? Because in China's religious world, there are three absolutely untouchable topics: the Vatican, Falun Gong, the Dalai Lama. Everyone in religious circles knows these three are strictly off-limits. Any contact with these groups has to be formally reported and approved. At Shi Yongxin's level, that kind of trip would have required clearance from the National Religious Affairs Bureau. Now ask yourself, do you think he got that approval to meet the Pope? Highly unlikely. And here's the key point. If his meeting with the Pope had been approved, China's state media would have reported it, but they didn't. Not a single word. The only mention came from a press release issued by the Vatican on February 4th. So it's pretty clear. Shi Yongxin broke a big rule, a serious one. And that's probably what triggered everything that followed. So now people are asking, come on, this guy's been in the Buddhist system for decades. He's the vice president of the Chinese Buddhist Association. He knows the rules. How could he make a mistake that big? Was it ignorance or arrogance? Did he really think he could go meet the Pope without consequences? I've come to believe that Shi Yongxin may have been set up, or at least misled, by an organization called the Europe-Asia Center. This Europe-Asia Center is an NGO based in Brussels, Belgium. The group's Secretary General is a Chinese man named Yan Rui. He graduated from Xi'an International Studies University, later went abroad for further studies, and even worked in some UN-affiliated organizations. Eventually, he became the head of this Europe-Asia Center. Now, the name might sound impressive, but the organization itself is actually tiny, maybe 7 or 8 people in total. Most of them are Chinese, with just a couple of foreign faces added for appearance. To be honest, there are tons of these kinds of NGOs overseas, small teams, big titles. This Europe-Asia Center organized Shi Yongxin's entire European tour, including the now infamous visit to the Vatican. I looked into the timeline of how their connection developed over the past few months. In September 2024, Irina Bokova, the former Director General of UNESCO, visited the Shaolin Temple. And guess who she went with? Yan Rui. Irina also happens to be listed as a senior advisor to the Europe-Asia Center. Basically, the center had recruited a bunch of high-profile names to make their group look more legit. They went as a group of 4. Yan Rui, a Chinese liaison named Ma Yunhua, a project director named Xiao Tongtong, and Irina herself. On September 14th, they visited the Shaolin Temple, where of course Shi Yongxin hosted them personally. Now imagine, you're Shi Yongxin, and this former high-ranking UN official shows up with an entourage, introduced by a man claiming to represent an international NGO. Naturally, you treat them with great respect. The very next day, September 15th, Irina visited the temple again. That showed how serious she was about this relationship. According to an official press release by the Shaolin Temple, the two sides agreed to cooperate, especially in connection with the United Nations. My guess? During this visit, the Europe-Asia Center was trying to lock down Shi Yongxin. They brought in Irina as leverage, pitching him on a partnership involving the UN. And given Irina's background, Shi Yongxin probably took it seriously. So the two sides signed a cooperation agreement. Fast forward to November 12th, and Shi Yongxin flew to Europe. From there, he continued on to Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. Between November 12th and 16th, Baku was hosting the 29th session of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, better known as COP29. This global climate summit is held every year and includes various sub-forums. One of those sub-forums is called the Faith Pavilion, focused on religion and spirituality's role in climate issues. Shi Yongxin attended events at the Faith Pavilion. And who arranged this trip? Again, it was the Europe-Asia Center. In their own press release, they even gave Shi Yongxin a new title, Senior Advisor to the Europe-Asia Center. That was the title he used when participating in the COP29 summit in Baku. He even gave a speech there. Lots of global political figures were also at the summit, and Shi Yongxin was seen mingling, having conversations, clearly enjoying the spotlight. After the event in Baku wrapped up on November 16th, he continued on to Brussels, the capital of Belgium, on November 17th and 18th for additional meetings. Now let's rewind back to China. On January 20th of this year, the Europe-Asia Center teamed up with the Shaolin Temple to host an event in Songshan. There were two other co-hosting organizations, one called the World Meditation Foundation, and another one with a name like UN Institute for Training and Research, or something similar. It sounded very much like one of those sketchy, unofficial organizations. Together, these four groups held a forum titled something like The Way of Zen and the Future. Shi Yongxin gave a speech at the event, and it seems like they also promoted something called the Mindfulness Training Program. This mindfulness course had actually been mentioned before during the planning of the Europe-Asia Center's earlier collaborations with Shi Yongxin. And the World Meditation Foundation had long been pushing this same program. So it looked like they were trying to rope in a few partners and turn this into a money-making project. Each attendee had to pay an 800 yuan registration fee. The forum took place over 2 days, January 20th and 21st. Then, on February 1st, right after that event, Shi Yongxin traveled abroad again, straight to Vatican City. That was when he met the Pope. And guess what? He wasn't alone. Yan Rui from the Europe-Asia Center personally accompanied him for the entire trip, along with their head of European affairs. In the center's official press release, they referred to the group as a Chinese Buddhist delegation, basically a delegation led by the abbot of the Shaolin Temple. They described the Europe-Asia Center as merely a member of that delegation, but in reality, the entire trip was arranged by them. Now I'm guessing that Shi Yongxin probably told them this meeting with the Pope had to remain private. After all, in China, the Pope is considered a politically sensitive figure, on par with someone like the Dalai Lama. But the Europe-Asia Center likely didn't communicate that clearly to the Vatican. And the Vatican, being the Vatican, has a dedicated department for interfaith dialogue. It's their job to engage with leaders from Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, etc., in order to showcase the Catholic Church's global influence. So under that pretext, Pope Francis personally met Shi Yongxin in his office. Of course, for Shi Yongxin, this was a huge moment. Meeting the Pope is a big deal, something very few people ever get to do. He must have been thrilled. But just a few days later, on February 4th, the Vatican's official news site published an article about the meeting. And at that moment, Shi Yongxin had already flown to Abu Dhabi for the next leg of his trip. When he got back to China, boom, he was hit with border restrictions. You see, all of this touched a major nerve back home. In China, any contact with sensitive religious figures, especially ones like the Pope, must be reported and approved in advance, at least at the level of the State Administration for Religious Affairs. It's clear he didn't file for approval. And because the Europe-Asia Center didn't tell the Vatican to keep it low profile, the Vatican thought it was a public event and reported it. Once that story came out, the Chinese authorities saw it. And when Shi Yongxin returned to China, the consequences hit. So why did this happen? I think the Europe-Asia Center overestimated their own reach. They probably believed they could play both sides, manage relations with the Vatican on one hand and handle religious resources in China on the other. To the West, they could say, hey look, we've got access to one of the top Buddhist leaders in China. And in China, they could say, we've got international influence, we can bring your name to the world stage. To them, someone like Shi Yongxin wasn't just a monk, he was a political asset. But what they may not have realized is that religion in China is heavily regulated. And in the end, this whole thing essentially set Shi Yongxin up for disaster. That said, let's be honest, Shi Yongxin isn't exactly an innocent victim either. Why? Because his participation in all of these international events had one clear purpose: to satisfy his personal ambition. Think about it. When he went to the Vatican to meet the Pope, under what identity did he appear? He was introduced as part of a Chinese Buddhist delegation, and also carried the title of Vice President of the Buddhist Association of China. So the message he was sending in the West was clear: I am a religious leader representing Chinese Buddhism. Same thing when he attended the COP29 Climate Summit, or the Interfaith Forums in Abu Dhabi. Events like those don't just let anyone in. You need official backing, approval from the state. The president of the Buddhist Association didn't even go. Yet the vice president did? Why? Because Shi Yongxin wasn't content with just being a politically connected monk inside China. He wanted more. He wanted to become an international figure, a kind of Chinese religious ambassador on the global stage, rubbing shoulders with UN officials, world leaders, religious heads. But here's the problem. You don't get to play that role without the Chinese government's green light. And what he did? That was crossing the red line, stepping on a landmine. By doing all this on his own, without approval, he directly violated China's strict religious policies. And here's another clue. After Shi Yongxin returned to China and was placed under border control in February, the official website of the State Administration for Religious Affairs started putting out article after article. What were they all about? Studying Xi Jinping's speeches, particularly his recent remarks on religion. Xi had been emphasizing the importance of sinicizing religion, that is, shaping religion to align with Chinese values and communist ideology. He also warned about foreign forces using religion to infiltrate China. Now, Xi didn't say Shi Yongxin's name directly, but it was widely understood these remarks were aimed at him. The messaging was clear. International religious exchanges aren't forbidden, but they must follow strict guidelines. One of those rules is, you must tell the story of Chinese religion well. Another key principle, all exchanges must go through formal approval. The word on the street is that Xi Jinping's push for stricter control, this whole governing religion with greater discipline campaign, was triggered in large part by what Shi Yongxin did. Because from the party's perspective, what Xi did looked a lot like going rogue. If this kind of thing isn't stopped, what's next? Maybe one day he visits the Dalai Lama. Maybe the next day he meets Li Hongzhi from Falun Gong. And then what happens to China's religious policy? What happens to control? That's why, in March, the State Administration for Religious Affairs rolled out a new legal draft. It stated that foreign religious groups wanting to hold events in China must apply for special approval, at least 20 working days in advance. They also emphasized that all religious activities must fall under the rule of law and tighter management. All of this, every line, every policy shift, can be traced back to Shi Yongxin's unauthorized trip to meet Pope Francis. And that, more than anything else, explains why he's now in serious trouble. Remember in Abu Dhabi, Shi Yongxin had even announced that he was planning to host an interfaith forum in Xinjiang in the summer of 2025. Well, go check. Did that forum ever happen? Of course not. How could it? Shi Yongxin himself got taken away by the authorities. The idea of organizing any kind of interfaith dialogue in China between Buddhism, Islam, and Catholicism is already walking a tightrope. China has strict policies when it comes to religion, especially with these global religions. Here's the thing. The Chinese government has always been especially cautious about three major world religions, Christianity, Catholicism, and Islam. Why? Because they're international. They have global networks, foreign leadership, and centralized organizations. And that makes Beijing nervous. They worry about foreign influence over believers inside China. Now, Buddhism has historically been seen as safer. Why? Because it's been deeply localized in China for centuries. It doesn't have a centralized global authority. There's no World Buddhist Organization telling monks in China what to do. But when Shi Yongxin went to the Vatican to meet the Pope, he basically turned Chinese Buddhism into a collaborator with what the party sees as hostile religious powers abroad. In other words, he crossed a line that was never his to cross. So maybe Shi Yongxin wasn't thinking straight. Or maybe he was just blinded by ambition and greed. He probably thought, as long as no one reports it, this quiet meeting with the Pope will boost my standing back in China's religious world. In the West, I'll be seen as the true face of Chinese Buddhism. What he didn't realize was that one meeting was a point of no return, a path straight to his own downfall. So to sum it all up, Shi Yongxin didn't fall because of the things people were saying about him 10 years ago, not because of alleged illegitimate children, not because of inappropriate relationships with women, not because of embezzling temple funds or misusing money. Did he do those things? Probably, let's be real. But for someone like the vice president of the Buddhist Association of China, the abbot of Shaolin Temple, that kind of dirt doesn't usually matter. I mean, look at Xu Xuecheng. He had all kinds of scandalous affairs with nuns. Did he get expelled? Number his monk credentials were never revoked. But in Shi Yongxin's case, the investigation isn't even over yet, and the Chinese Buddhist Association has already stripped him of his monk credentials, his Jai Dai, and kicked him out of the system. What does that tell you? It tells you that his real crime wasn't sex or money. It was politics. In China, religion is tightly controlled. You're not allowed to operate outside the party's oversight. As a religious figure, you serve the party's religious agenda. Period. Shi Yongxin spent his whole life walking this path. He made a career out of religion. He built a reputation, power, wealth, all from Buddhism. But in the end, he tripped over the Communist Party's red lines. And now, what's likely waiting for him is the end of his political life, and possibly even the loss of his personal freedom. Of course, the rest of us are just watching this unfold like any other internet scandal. Illegitimate kids, affairs, group sex, money, none of it surprises anyone anymore. And let's be honest, nobody's feeling sorry for him. Because in China, as the saying goes, when the party needs you, even illegitimate kids don't matter. When the party doesn't need you, even if you don't have any, they'll find a way to make you guilty. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this whole Yongxin Pope Francis story. That's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
看我做媒体，我都不知道您的每年收入多少，然后大概是哪一类的收入？
您媒体这么少林寺的收入被媒体披露的基本是公开的。
但是既然这样的话，您有没有考虑，其实公开一个账目，因为某个程度其实也可以啊，这个可以说是消除很多一些传闻呐甚至谣言呐，不是更好的一个做法吗？
我们不是独立的，我们还考虑佛教界兄弟宗教，还考虑很多因素。
比如说有些传闻说你外边有很多钱，哪里有别墅啊，甚至更离谱的说您还有老婆孩子这些。当然我们都不知道，但是您愿不愿意借这个平台来就这一系列的传闻来做一个回应呢？
要有问题早就成问题了。
就您觉得这都是谣言？
我说了，有问题早就成问题了。
前少林寺方丈释永信被举报违反戒律问题调查已经有了初步的结果。经河南省相关部门的调查，释永信当年被签单及僧人犯戒被并出门的说法不属实，其方丈资格的获得如法合规。此前被举报为释永信私生女之一的韩某恩系释某某收养，此前释某某已经丧失生育能力。另一名被举报为释永信私生女的刘某亚，经亲子鉴定证实为释永信4弟的女儿。释永信被举报的经济和其他问题正在调查中。
我们安排时间跟我们见面。
Confucianesimo, Taoismo e Buddismo, tutte cultura tradizionale cinesi. Uno intero cristallo fatto da un intero anche questo anello.
Smile.
网上一直都在传释永信方丈被警方带走，在24号下午，不知道这个是不是真的。
官方的信息，
官方的信息是咱们自己会发布吗？那您这2天在寺院里边有看到释永信方丈吗？
我没看去找他，我来这边学习了。
您现在没在寺院里是吧？
对，我刚到这边学习。
那就是网上说的这个事儿是不是真的？
我不知道，我现在来这边学习了，知道吧？